Good morning. This is going to be a crazy podcast. It's going to be 6 minutes of frankincense, and dare I say, it will be the best frankincense podcast in history because it probably is the only one. Hang in there. So, frankincense of the Bible came from a long way away from Israel, from Bethlehem, where it was delivered to by one of the wise men to the baby Jesus. So, one of the rules of worship is that worship is supposed to cost you something. There's a great story in 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 24, where David is offered some land and some equipment to make an offering to worship the Lord. And David says, no, I want to buy it. And then he says, I will buy it for you for a price. I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord that cost me nothing. So let's consider frankincense. Okay, so frankincense is harvested from a specific balsam tree native only to Sheba, which is current modern-day Yemen, and Somaliland, which is this outpouching about halfway down the continent of Africa. Then it was transported all the way up to Babylon, which was where they think the wise men were from, over the Gulf of Aden, which is a branch of the Indian Ocean, and over land, walking speed, 1,500 miles, about 75 days. Then it was carried by the wise men to Jerusalem, which is 500 miles as the crow flies, but about 800 miles on the main trade route. So that's another 45 days. So for 115 days, almost 3 months, it was before frankincense could go from a tree to where it was delivered to Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus. It had traveled 2,300 miles, which is the distance from LA to Tampa, Florida. So it was precious in the very fact that it made it that far. So about gifting to Jesus, remember, this incense was the only incense that was allowed in the temple and in the tabernacle. So this would have smelled like the temple, like the altar before the sacrifice. It would have been the smell of the nearness of God, the presence of God. And it would hint at eventually the sacrifice and the slaughter of the Savior. So Jesus puts Jesus as this only authorized, allowed sacrifice. Now, the second gift of the Magi was gold, and that came from a little bit nearer in Egypt, perhaps Saudi Arabia, perhaps Turkey area, and even Iraq. But it demonstrates his kingship, and it's kind of the pure value play there. So I'm going to move on to myrrh. So myrrh is a sap that's used in an incense, in perfume, in burial. It's also a stimulant. So it was associated with Jesus because they offered him some wine mixed with myrrh to kind of dull the pain of the crucifixion, and he refused it because he wanted to experience, presumably, all the suffering necessary to fix the sin and death problem. And then after he dies, after he's crucified, he's taken down, he's put in the tomb. And then John 19:39 states, Nicodemus, who had earlier come to Jesus by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds in weight. So they took the body of Jesus, bound it in linen cloths with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. So this was a huge amount of this spice, and the substance used in embalming here, this amount was, in today's dollars, like $150,000 to $200,000 worth of stuff, and it's the highest value tribute that these two rich men gives for the most valuable death. So before Jesus even gets started in his life, there's this foreshadowing of his suffering, his sacrifice, his death, and his embalming. And in a sense, his death is planned and predicted by these guys coming at the time of his birth. So wouldn't it be cool if the Magi knew that Jesus had to go through the sacrifice of death, burial, and that they were providing, in a sense, or at least prophesying that very thing? So in a sense, the stuff that they brought could be an act of faith. That is, they would be saying, I believe that you are coming to be sacrificed. Well, if so, God gave them some special insight and clarity, because even when it actually came to be, he had to, sort of convince the disciples who just kind of refused even to believe it. But wouldn't it be cool if they knew that Jesus had to suffer for them? So all this stuff, the gold, the frankincense, the myrrh, all this stuff is pleasant, it's fragrant, it's beautiful, but it's also rare and precious and valuable. And it's associated with his kingship, his death, his burial, and his sacrifice. So let's say, in conclusion, that you knew all about Jesus, and you knew all you know about him now and could be magically transported back to his infancy. Here's the question. What gift would you bring? What could you bring of value? What would be commensurate with the value that he is? Do you have any gold, laying around? Is there something sweet smelling laying around? Something prophetic and forecasting, something that would be a comfort to him in the meantime. So what pleases God? When we acknowledge that he is rare, that he is precious, that he is valuable, and we, like the wise guys, can bring our worship. So yes, worship is the stuff. Worship with stuff and valuable things, probably our exchangeable money, but especially our hearts of awe and appreciation. So let's, with our versions of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, let's us go and worship with the wise guys. Thanks for listening.